Did you miss me? How's it going, everybody? Hope you're having a great day. My name is Eric, and welcome back to Out of the Groove. And yes, I did say back. It's been 2 weeks since the last episode of Out of the Groove. I had last week off because I was out of town, like many of y'all know. I made a bunch of those vlogs all over the place. Sorry for annoying you with those. But we're back this week. We're back to talk about Pocono. We're going to preview Watkins Glen. I got a list here of notes of things I got to discuss. A lot of news this week and a little bit of last week that I missed. So this is going to be a jam-packed episode. We're going to try and keep it a good length. Okay, so to start with Pocono, Kyle Busch wins his first race of the season, finally. Dude had like 8 stage wins already this year, something like that. He was like 4th in points, but he didn't have a win yet. He'd been really close many times, had many things go wrong to keep him from winning, but this weekend at Pocono, he was not to be denied. So now after, we spent weeks and months talking about how bad Joe Gibbs Racing has been and how they can't win a race, now Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch have given Gibbs 2 wins in the last 3 weeks or so, things are definitely looking up for him. In fact, all of the Joe Gibbs Racing cars finished in the top 10 at Pocono, so yeah, things definitely looking up for that team, which I'm sure so many of you are excited about. Because if there's one driver that everyone loves, it's Kyle Busch. Although I must say Kyle Busch was in better spirits than usual this weekend, probably because he had a really good car and he didn't have something horrible go wrong to, keep him from winning the race. But, Kyle Busch didn't bother me too bad. But there was some interesting news coming out earlier this week in regards to Xfinity Series and truck racing stuff. And I know what you're thinking, how does this have to do with Kyle Busch and the Cup Series? Eric, what are you talking about the Cup Series? Why are we talking about Xfinity stuff? Well, it has to do with Kyle Busch. We all know and kind of resent the fact that Kyle Busch often runs Xfinity and often runs truck races, and typically when he's in either of those races, he dominates. If he doesn't win, he's usually top 2 or 3, and it really kind of takes a lot of the competitive edge out of those races. And for a few years it didn't seem like that big a deal. Kyle Busch was still a young driver running in the Xfinity Series and stuff, and it was kind of fun, didn't have too big a deal. But the last few years especially, Kyle Busch has won a Cup Series championship now, and he's a little older. Last year or two, it really feels like it's a man amongst boys when he's out there racing in those Xfinity races, just cleaning everyone's clock. So last year, NASCAR announced rules for this year, in which case drivers who had more than 5 years of experience in the Cup Series could only race in 10 Xfinity races. That rule was in direct result to guys like Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, names like that who've kind of run really well in the Xfinity Series the last couple of years. That was supposed to limit the amount of races they would come in and effectively dominate. And I think it's done an okay job this year. There are definitely less races, like this last weekend. I guess they're in Iowa, so there's usually not very many Cup drivers in Iowa. But there's been more races like that where we've seen Xfinity drivers who we don't often hear about, like Ryan Preece, Kyle Benjamin, there's a few others I could name, who we often probably wouldn't have heard about if not for the fact that guys like Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski can't run as many Xfinity races as usual. That's all well and good, but NASCAR then announced this week that for next season, drivers with 5 years or more of experience in the Cup Series could only run 7 Xfinity races and only 5 races in the Truck Series. And again, this is in direct result to fans constantly resenting and complaining about the fact that whenever Kyle Busch runs in the Xfinity or Truck Series, he typically leads the most laps and he quite often wins. So for the second year in a row, we'll be seeing guys like Kyle Busch in the Xfinity and lower level series, just a little bit less. So I'm sure a lot of people are happy about that. I'm happy about it from a fan watching for entertainment sakes. I've never wanted to complain about Kyle Busch, dominating the Xfinity Series as much as other people, because in a lot of ways, when Cup drivers, especially ones I like when Denny Hamlin or back a few years ago when Matt Kenseth ran Xfinity races from time to time, honestly, I may not have watched those races had drivers I really like not been in them like that. And I get the Xfinity Series continues to grow. There's young names like guys like Chase Elliott, Ricky Stenhouse, guys who are now Kyle Larson, guys who are really succeeding in the Cup Series now. Just recently were in the Xfinity Series, so there are names down there to root for. Elliott Sadler, to name one. Darrell Walsh Jr. I know that team's kind of out, but I know he was a popular one. Guys like Justin Allgaier. There's just a lot of good names down there that now that series has kind of built up a reputation of its own. It doesn't necessarily need to rely on the names like Kyle Busch and like Denny Hamlin and like Brad Keselowski racing in those series to continue to get decent viewership. I would be interested to see, though, how the ratings for this weekend's race at Iowa would compare to, say, a race at one of these other tracks where Kyle Busch was at. Because NASCAR probably has access to those ratings, and obviously they must think that having Kyle Busch in a race doesn't really help viewership, so that's why they're making these rules. I also did read an interesting quote from Kyle Busch in response, I suppose, to these changes, and he basically said that if they ever basically just stop letting him run Xfinity or Truck Series races specifically ever again, he basically said he might just pull the plug and get rid of his Kyle Busch Motorsports team, which has held some of the best trucks in that series the last couple of years. And his reasoning for it was, why would he pay to constantly run in a series if he's not allowed to run in a series, and he's basically just helping young drivers get better so that they could one day replace him. And a lot of people gave him a lot of grief for this statement. I think they just like to hate Kyle Busch. And I'm not gonna lie, it definitely sounds a little selfish when he acts like, oh, well, if I'm not allowed to race, nobody can race because I don't want any of these young drivers to beat me one day. Sure, it sounds a little paranoid, sounds a little selfish, but when you actually take a step back and look at the way NASCAR is changing, he's completely right, in my opinion. Gone are the days where Mark Martin, Dale Jarrett's, people like that would race into their 50s, and, now it's, once you hit 35, 40 years old, people are starting to ask you when you're going to retire. I mean, we can see it this year. Matt Kenseth, 45 years old, still capable of winning races, still capable of winning championships. Good chance he doesn't race next year because there's young drivers like Eric Jones, Daniel Suarez, Christopher Bell, all these William Byrons, Alex Bowman's taking all these rides everywhere. He just may not get a good ride somewhere. And Matt Kenseth is 45 years old. Jeff Gordon retired at 45. Tony Stewart I think he was 45 also. The age of retirement is going to continue to go down, and Kyle Busch right now is in his 30s, it's fairly early 30s, but realistically Kyle Busch could race for championships, I think, 10 or 15 more years. But with the age of retirement continuing to go down, by the time Kyle Busch is 37, 38, people could be looking to replace him, even if he's really good still. So I don't completely blame him for wanting to close down the Truck Series. I hope you guys are able to see that point that he's trying to make and not just hate him because he's Kyle Busch, because he makes, he says it in kind of not a great way, as Kyle Busch is known to do, he's not wrong. Anyway, I talked more about that than I meant to. Let me go back to my list. While I'm on the subject of contracts and stuff, I guess talk about some other weird news that came out this week. I don't even know if it's news. I guess it's fake news, I suppose. There was a rumor, or it was actually reported by NBC at some point, that Kurt Busch was not going to be in the 41 next season. And now this isn't completely surprising. If you remember my silly season chart I did a couple Out of the Grooves ago, Kurt Busch is one of those drivers who it has been rumored that his contract would be up and he would not race at Stewart-Haas Racing next year, especially amidst the fact that Monster may not come back to sponsor his car. They may just sponsor the series and forget about Kurt Busch, so sponsorship was an issue for him. And Stewart-Haas Racing already has a lot of question marks. Danica Patrick's also another driver. There's a very good chance she's not back next year. So a lot of question marks around Stewart-Haas Racing right now. And this report came out middle of the week that Kurt Busch was just out, and it really had no proof. It just said, it had no credited sources. It just said, oh, sources say Kurt Busch is out. And almost immediately, Stewart-Haas Racing's Twitter account came out and said, oh, we don't talk about contract stuff, but we expect Kurt Busch to race next year. And that, from what I saw, was their only official statement. So they're keeping it vague, which makes the report maybe seem true. But as of Wednesday afternoon when I'm filming this, there had not been any reports for sure or completely against the fact that Kurt Busch will or will not be at Stewart-Haas Racing next year. When I talked about NASCAR's silly season a couple episodes ago, I mentioned Kurt Busch. There's a chance he'd be gone, but I felt fairly confident he would stay in the 41 car. I guess I still feel that way. I still feel pretty confident. But yeah, this report definitely raised some eyebrows this week. Now, let's talk about some other NASCAR silly season developments. Y'all know I missed an episode last week because I was in Florida or wherever I was at the time. I was maybe in Georgia. Anyway, I was out of town. But last week they announced a couple drivers going to new cars that I should probably briefly talk about. So far I was doing pretty lousy in my predictions. I predicted Matt Kenseth going to the 88. That was obviously wrong, but I'm starting to get a little bit better now after last week. Ryan Blaney, who's in the 21 Wood Brothers racing car this season, it was announced that he will drive the number 12 car for Penske Racing. They're going to open up a third team for the first time in quite a while. Or have they ever had a third team? I think they have. Anyway, Ryan Blaney will be in the 12 car, so that's new. And I was right about that one. I predicted that and I was right. Yes! But the other news, a little more surprising, at least in my opinion, is that Paul Menard, who's driven the number 27 car at RCR the last few years, will be taking over that 21 car. And while I had heard rumors that, Menards is a big sponsor for Paul Menard, I had heard rumors that they were in talks with Wood Brothers, that could be a deal that worked out. Obviously, that must be what happened. Because, to be honest, no offense to Paul Menard, if the fact that there's so many good young drivers out there right now ready to come up to the Cup Series, and Paul Menard's kind of on the older side, and he's really never proven himself to be that great, the fact that he's getting a good ride like the 21 car is stunning to me. I don't want to say he doesn't deserve it, but he doesn't deserve it. there's really no other way to say it. He's won one race in his career, and that was like 6 years ago. I mean, granted, RCR has not been as good as they used to be the last few years, but he's been the worst RCR car the last couple of years, so that's definitely not a good thing. And now I don't know the full story behind Menard's, I guess they're a grocery store chain. I don't have them where I'm from. I think I've seen one before, and I think they're like a big grocery store, Menard's are. I guess, is that Paul Menard, Menard's, is that a family-owned thing? I should have probably done my research before I started this episode. But no matter who they are, the fact that they've continued to support Paul Menard despite his low-key, very kind of understated personality and his subpar results on the racetrack for all these years is shocking to me. You know, NASCAR continues to have issues here and there with sponsorship. It's also worth noting Target announced this week that they will not be sponsoring Kyle Larson next year, which is another huge deal. But Menards continue to sponsor Paul Menard, and now they're sponsoring him when he goes to a pretty good race car. I don't know, I hope Paul Menard runs well next year and earns that ride, but with some other big names on the market, like Danica Patrick, like a Matt Kenseth, like potentially a Kurt Busch, the fact that Paul Menard's getting that ride, you know, that's a new one. Anyway, I dropped my list. Yeah, I mentioned Target leaving Kyle Larson next year. That is a big blow to NASCAR. Target has been with that 42 team since the Juan Pablo Montoya days. They've been with Kyle Larson since he got to that team. And Kyle Larson is just now, last year and this year, is showing that he can be a playoff contender, a championship contender. And the fact that Target is choosing now to decide, oh, I guess the NASCAR sponsorships, that's not worth the money, and leave, that really that's a big blow to NASCAR. It's almost as bad as if, say, Lowe's suddenly decided, hey, we're going to leave Jimmy Johnson after all these years and all these championships and all these great exposure. It's almost as bad as if they did that. Anyway, I just feel like I had to mention that. Let's move on. The last big thing I really want to talk about before I start to look at previews for Watkins Glen is, well, I guess what I'm going to talk about kind of goes back to not just this last week in Pocono, but also at Indianapolis during my off week. It's the playoff bubble. Looking at the playoff bubble right now, there are 5 big names, if you ask me, that are all pretty close. 14th on the grid right now is Chase Elliott. He's 39 points ahead of the cutoff, which sounds like a lot, but in the age of stage racing, if a couple of those drivers behind him have a great race with good stage points and get a good finish and Elliott struggles, Chase Elliott could be right back there on the cut line. Jamie McMurray is 15th. He's only 1 point worse than Elliott. He's 38 points ahead of the cutoff, so kind of the same deal. Still riding strong in that 16th position is Matt Kenseth. He's only 17 points ahead. He was actually like 30 points ahead after Indianapolis, but Clint Bowyer had a very strong run at Pocono this week. Kenseth had an okay run, but Bowyer was so strong, he cut that gap a little bit. Kenseth is only 17 points ahead of him. Clint Bowyer, like I said, is 17 points back, and he kind of been struggling or been looking kind of iffy for a while, but a good race at Pocono could bode well. He's also good at road courses, so Watkins Glen could be a big race for him. And lastly, Joey Logano, who at the beginning of this year we all figured would be in the playoffs, no problem. Figured he'd probably be a championship contender, no problem. He's 18th in points right now with the way the chase grid is set up, 69 whole points behind Matt Kenseth for that final spot. And he's just had a tough run the last few weeks. It hasn't really necessarily been just a lot of wrecks, although he has had some bad luck in that case. He's just had subpar race cars. He's just kind of been irrelevant out there. He's not competing for stage wins. He's not competing for race wins. He's lucky if he's running in the top 10 these days. So I don't know what's happened to that 22 team. They've gone from being a championship contender the last couple of years to really struggling this year. And their teammate Brad Keselowski is not looking as great as he has been, but he's still looking pretty good. So I'm not sure where they lost the grip on it there. And now if you ask me, Joey Logano, who did get a win earlier this year, although it was encumbered, Joey Logano's going to need a win in the last few races here if he wants to make the playoffs. If you ask me, that's what it's going to take. If he was 17th in points right now and only had one guy to worry about, if, like, say, Kenseth was 16th, how he is, and then Logano was 17th, I would say maybe he could catch some good breaks and point his way in. But since he's also got Clint Bowyer there between him and Kenseth, that's going to be tough. I think he's going to have to win. And we've seen in the past Joey Logano can win in very high-pressure scenarios, so it's not entirely impossible, but they're going to have a pretty big turnaround if they're going to start to look competitive again. So if you want to give my playoff bubble predictions, we're going to Watkins Glen, a track where Clint Bowyer's been good at in the past, Joey Logano's pretty decent at, McMurray, Chase Elliott, they're so-so. Matt Kenseth, not a great road racer, but he's better at Watkins Glen than he is at Sonoma for sure. I think the guy this weekend really favors is Clint Bowyer. He's probably the best road racer of those 5 guys I mentioned. He's, like I say, 17 points behind Matt Kenseth, so this could be a big weekend for him to close that gap, maybe get even with Kenseth, make it really close there, because those 2 guys right on the bubble, you got to keep in mind, if another driver back there, 18th, 19th, Eric Jones, Daniel Suarez, Dale Jr., one of those guys wins a race, then it's not going to matter how Kenseth does. They're going to have to get up there to where Chase Elliott and Jamie McMurray are. A lot of high pressure. A win could go a super long way for any of those guys I've mentioned. And it's just going to be interesting. But if you ask me, I think Clint Bowyer's in a position where he can take some serious advantage of this weekend at Watkins Glen. He's probably the best at that track of the guys I named. But of course, none of these big-name championship contending drivers would be in this precarious and very unfortunate scenario if NASCAR had a fair playoff system. And please don't turn off the video or skip ahead yet. I know I've complained about the playoff system before, but it's a joke. I have to say, this might be the most angry I get on Out of the Groove, guys. Just brace yourself. I didn't do an episode last week after Indianapolis, because after Indianapolis, Kasey Kahne won the race, which I didn't talk about. Kasey Kahne won that race in Indianapolis. Really happy for him. Really, really excited that he got a win. Maybe he'll stop looking depressed every week for at least the next month or so. He'll look okay and be happy for once. But Kasey Kahne's in the playoffs right now. Clint Bowyer's not. Joey Logano's not. Matt Kenseth is on the bubble. Chase Elliott, Jamie McMurray are on the bubble. Kasey Kahne's in the playoffs. Austin Dillon's in the playoffs. Ricky Stenhouse's in the playoffs. These guys are all outside the top 16 in points. If we just looked at points, as in who's finished the best, the most consistently all season long, those three drivers I named are not in the top 16 in points. And especially in the case of Austin Dillon and Kasey Kahne, they are terrible this year. They've looked below average on almost every track. Austin Dillon got super lucky that he won at Charlotte, that a caution didn't come out, that he was running far enough back in the pack that he was able to gamble on that ridiculous strategy that would not work 99% of the time. Then Kasey Kahne got even luckier with the caution coming out right when he was on pit road, so that he was in the perfect position to not lose a lap and then also take over the lead on fresh tires on the next restart. He was in the perfect scenario. Now granted, Kasey Kahne, that was a heck of a restart at the end of the thing to win that race, but yeah, the only reason he was in that position was due to dumb luck. And now we got these drivers in the playoffs ahead of guys like Bowyer, like Kenseth, like Chase Elliott, for a while ahead of Kyle Busch until he finally got his win at Pocono. And honestly, it makes NASCAR look like a laughingstock if you ask me. It's one of the reasons so many sports fans don't take NASCAR seriously, because they pull crap like this. I've been the biggest advocate for many of the things NASCAR's added. When they added the chase back in 2004, that's around the time I guess I became a fan. I didn't know what the chase was at the time, but I guess that is kind of how it worked out. I've always thought the chase was a good thing for NASCAR. Some people complained about it. I was like, you know, every other sport has a playoff system. Why not give NASCAR one? And for a while, it was a fair playoff system that I thought worked. And now they continue to add gimmicks. And like I said, I've liked most of these gimmicks. Even the gimmick they have now with the different rounds going into like the Eliminator, the Contender round. I like that. I think that's done good things for NASCAR. And I think if you look at the last few champions we've had since that format was introduced, I mean, Kyle Busch, Jimmy Johnson, these are all drivers that, I think earned that championship, and it's not like, they got cheated out of it. And even when NASCAR introduced stage racing this year, some people were against it. I was in favor of it. And I think so far stage racing has been good. I think there are less people complaining about stage racing now than there were at the beginning of the year. So I think it's done a decent job. Now, granted, the overtime line's stupid. But other than that, I've been in favor of just about everything NASCAR has done. But the last couple of years, I have been skeptical of the win-and-you're-in format. I last year on Out of the Groove, I said that the win-and-you're-in format was dumb because if you won the first race of the season, you didn't have to worry about anything for the next 26 weeks, and it was boring. And I didn't like that it gave, like last year, it gave Chris Buescher, who got lucky with his rain-out win at Pocono, it gave him a playoff spot ahead of guys like, last year, I think it was like Kasey Kahne, some other guys who were probably definitely more deserving, but Chris Buescher got that spot ahead of them. Now this year, it's been even worse. I said Austin Dillon, he's been outside the top 20 in points almost all year. He doesn't deserve a playoff spot. Kasey Kahne, same thing. He's been outside the top 20 in points almost all year. I think he's like 19th right now, so good for him. He doesn't deserve a playoff spot. Up until this last weekend at Pocono, Kyle Busch was 4th in points, as in he has won like 8 stages. He has collected the 4th most amount of points of everyone in this series, and he was not locked in. But Kasey Kahne, Austin Dillon, Ricky Stenhouse, Kurt Busch, they were. And no matter how this season plays out, some combination of Joey Logano, Clint Bowyer, Matt Kenseth, maybe Elliott or McMurray even, are going to miss the playoffs. And that's not right. All 5 of those drivers I just named are in the top 13 in points. And remember, the top 16 make the playoffs. These guys are the top 13. Kenseth is 9th, McMurray's 8th, Bowyer's like 10th, and these guys might miss the playoffs. I watch a lot of sports, and I hate to make analogies with other sports because NASCAR is a very different sport. It's not like football where each week there's one team playing one team and there's one winner and one loser. No, NASCAR, each week, all the teams are playing each other and there's only one winner and 30-something losers. It's very different, but this is a similarity or at least a relation I have to make. At least when I watch baseball, football, basketball, I feel like when the playoffs start, the best teams made the playoffs. And when the playoffs roll through and the championship series or game happens, and whoever wins that game wins, I typically feel like the best team won the championship in pretty much every other sport. But with the way NASCAR is with this system, the best teams aren't making the playoffs. And we know it. It's not even a subjective thing. We know Joey Logano, Clint Bowyer, Matt Kenseth, we know they've been better than Austin Dillon this year. The stats prove it. And so I know NASCAR's not going to make any changes next year probably. Maybe they'll make changes the year after if enough people get annoyed by this inconsistent and just wild card aspect of it, because it makes NASCAR not feel like a sport. It makes NASCAR feel like cheap thrill entertainment. It makes it feel like the WWE, which I don't watch WWE because, I mean, I can tell it's entertaining, but it's not real. NASCAR is a sport. I want it to remain a sport. I like sports. I want NASCAR to be a sport where the most talented teams and drivers are able to compete fairly for the ultimate prize. And this current regular season point system that rewards winning above all else doesn't do that. So while I wanted to be really excited for Kasey Kahne winning at Indianapolis, and I was in a sentimental sense, my brain just kept telling me, well shoot, now he's in the playoffs. That's not fair. Kasey Kahne wins the race. Great. Great for him. That team really needed it. That's a big weekend for him and his sponsors. He can party. He is the center of attention for that weekend because he won the race. But he shouldn't get a playoff spot. I talked about it like at Daytona in the Coke 0400, like all the hype behind Dale Jr. I really wanted to root for Dale Jr. I wanted to be there, the guy. I was cheering for Dale Jr. I wanted to be able to root for him without knowing that if he did win that race, he was going to screw a bunch of drivers out of a playoff spot. I hope I'm making my point clear, and obviously, you don't have to agree with me, but I hope you guys can at least see that the way NASCAR's current regular season point system is, it is unfair. And I maybe people are okay with that. Maybe enough people are okay with the win in your own format that they're never going to change it. But I hope they do. I think it's unfair. I like, when it comes to sports and when it comes to making the playoffs and stuff, I'd like it to be fair. And I'd like it to reward the best teams and not just reward, the teams who have lightning strike once in a blue moon and make it in that way. So that's the end of my rant. You're lucky I didn't have an episode last week because it would have probably been twice as long and twice as much yelling. Because I was mad after that race. That race, it was a joke. Not just because of Kahne winning and screwing up with the playoffs and everything, but also all the wrecks at the end of the race, all the red flags. It was a mess. But that is in the past. Cooler heads have prevailed. Hopefully NASCAR makes some changes down the line. But thank you guys for watching this episode. I hope it lived up to expectations after missing last week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for all of your support. Even if you don't always agree with my opinions on NASCAR, this is just NASCAR. It's just sports. So hopefully, we can all see each other's points of view and get through it. This ain't politics. Not really. So finally, I'll make it very quick. Predictions for Watkins Glen. I'm picking Brad Keselowski. I talked about how Penske's been struggling, mainly Joey Logano, and how Keselowski hasn't been quite as good as usual. He's pretty good at Watkins Glen. I think he wins this weekend. So that's my Watkins Glen picks. Let's wrap this up. But anyway, yes, thank you guys for watching. Episode, we will be back next Thursday. I'm not planning on any more off weekends anytime soon, maybe ever. I think we'll be good. I've made some other videos the last couple days. I did a little animation about a cat and a bird I'd worked on a long time ago that I finally got around to finishing. You can check that out. You can check out the vlogs from my vacation if you want to know where I was the last 10 days or so. You can check out some of those. I know it's a little new, kind of different. Probably never going to do it again. But anyway, guys, thanks again for watching. I can't say that enough. I can't tell you guys enough how much your support means to me. We're almost at 50,000 subscribers, I noticed, on this channel. That is a big deal. You're gonna have to do something wild for that. Man, I'll have to think about it. Summer's starting to wind down. I'm trying to finish a bunch of videos. I got Dudley Cup Series stuff in the works as well because I missed all that time. I gotta make up for lost time. Oh, I'm tired, so I need to wrap this up so I can start editing everything. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it. See you next week. Hopefully Watkins Glen is fun.